Have you ever found yourself staring at a screen, completely lost in a massive, tangled web of if-else statements? Yeah, we've all been there. It is a classic coding nightmare. Well, today we're going to untangle that whole mess with a really elegant design pattern that'll make your code cleaner, way more flexible, and honestly, just a lot easier to manage. Let's get into it. So, what's on the docket today? First, we're going to break down a problem that I am almost positive you've run into. Then, we'll use a real-world example to make the solution just kind of click. After that, we'll dig into the details of the pattern itself, see how all the pieces fit together, and finally, we'll talk about when you should, and maybe when you shouldn't, reach for this pretty powerful tool. All right, let's kick things off with a real pain point, one that I think pretty much every single developer has felt. It's a code structure that seems so simple at first, but it can spiral out of control fast. You know what I'm talking about, right? You've seen this, a giant, sprawling block of conditional logic, just trying to handle all the different kinds of requests your app might get. And look, it works, for now, but it comes at a pretty serious cost down the line. And this is where it really gets you. This kind of code is it's incredibly brittle. What happens when you need to add a new request type? Or you realize that check C actually needs to run before check B? Well, you've got to dive right back into this big, monolithic beast of a function. One simple change can create this ripple effect, introducing all sorts of new and exciting bugs. It just doesn't scale. So, how do we get out of this mess? Let's actually step away from the code for a second and think about a process that we're all familiar with, just placing an online order. Think about it. When you click that buy button, it's not like your order just magically happens. No, it goes on a journey. First up, there's the authentication check. Hey, do we even know who you are? Pass that, and you're on to the payment check. Is this credit card going to work? Okay, payment's good. Next, inventory. Do we actually have this thing in stock? And finally, the shipping check. Can we even get this to your address? You see? Each step is like its own little gatekeeper. And if any one of those checks fails, the whole process might stop, but the request is always passed down the line, one step at a time. And that whole idea, passing a request down a line of totally independent handlers, that is the absolute core of the solution we're talking about today. This is where a design pattern comes in to formalize that real-world logic into code. So here it is, the official definition. The chain of responsibility pattern basically lets you build a pipeline of objects. A request goes in one end, and each object in that pipeline gets a chance to deal with it. If it can't, no problem. It just shrugs and passes it on to the next one in line. Now, this is the really crucial part. The sender is completely decoupled from the receiver. So what does that actually mean? It means the code that starts the whole process, it doesn't need to know anything about the chain itself. It has no idea who's in it, what order they're in, nothing. All it needs to know is the address of the very first link. The sender basically just shouts the request into the void and trusts that the chain will figure it out. Okay, so let's pop the hood and see how this thing is actually built. What are the pieces we need to assemble one of these chains? So what are the building blocks here? First, you have a common handler interface. Think of this as the rulebook. Every link in the chain has to follow it. Then you have your concrete handlers. These are your specialists, right? Your payment checker, your stock checker. The client is the one who kicks the whole thing off. And a lot of the time, you'll have a base handler class that just handles the boring part of passing the request to the next handler. So your specialists can focus on their one job. This slide really shows you the payoff. I mean, look at the before and after. Before, our code was a tangled, monolithic mess. Now it's clean, it's decoupled. Before, changing the logic was just asking for trouble. Now, you can add new handlers, remove old ones, or even reorder the entire chain on the fly while the application is running without ever touching the original client code. That's a huge deal. Okay, so this all sounds pretty great, but here's the million-dollar question. When should you actually use this in your own projects? Because it's a powerful tool for sure, but it's not the right tool for every single job. This pattern really starts to shine when you need serious flexibility. A perfect example is a UI event system, you know? A click might be handled by a button, but if not, it gets passed to its parent panel, and then maybe to the window itself. Or think about a document processing pipeline, where different rules get applied one after another. If you need a strict order of operations, and especially if that order might need to change, this pattern is an absolutely fantastic choice. And this chart really just sums up the trade-off perfectly. With that monolithic if-else block, your code coupling is through the roof, and your flexibility is basically zero. But by switching to the chain of responsibility, you just slash that coupling and get this massive boost in flexibility. Yeah, the initial setup might be a little more complex, but the long-term payoff is absolutely worth it. But, of course, no pattern is a silver bullet, right? It's not perfect. On the plus side, it lines up with some really great software design principles. Each handler has one and only one responsibility, and you can add new functionality without modifying existing code. But there are downsides. It's totally possible for a request to get to the end of the chain and nobody handled it. And if something goes wrong, trying to trace a request through a long dynamic chain can definitely be trickier than debugging a single function. This isn't like the decorator pattern where you're just adding on responsibilities. Here, you're passing a baton, and you really have to hope somebody is there to grab it. I love this quote because it just hits the nail on the head. It perfectly captures what's happening. You're not just shuffling code around. You are fundamentally changing its structure, from a rigid top-to-bottom script into a flexible system of clean, independent, and totally manageable objects that know how to work together. So the question I want to leave you with is this. Start looking for those tangled messes of conditional logic in your own code. The next time you see a massive if, else, or switch statement, just pause and ask yourself, could these checks be turned into a chain of independent handlers? You might just find the perfect place to build a more robust, a more flexible, and a much more elegant solution. That hidden chain is just waiting for you to build it.